The Birhan Farm, Kilara. I must be out of my mind.
Etain watched the ramshackle farmhouse buildings through a gap in the barn's planked walls. The roofs were outlined against the deepening turquoise of the dusk sky. 2 lamps stood by the porch of the main building to keep the Gadans away from the path to the outside refresher. There were so many of the little predators nesting around the farm that one of their warrens had subsided, leaving a gaping hole in the farmyard that was now filling up every time it rained. Birhan wasn't big on maintenance. That did make some tasks easier, though. Satisfied that nobody was approaching, she went back to working boards loose from the barn's frame at the rear of the building. There was no other exit if she were ambushed, so she was making one. She concentrated on the boards, fixing their shape and position in her mind. Then she visualized them separating and moving aside, creating a gap.
Move, she thought. Just part. Swing aside.
And the boards did indeed move. She rehearsed shifting them with the force a few times, letting them fall back into place quietly. Yes, she could control the force. When she felt confident and controlled, she could master everything Fullier had taught her. But those days could be few and far between. She wrestled with a temper unbefitting a Jedi. She watched those with serene acceptance of the Force and envied their certainty. She wondered why Jedi blood had bothered to manifest itself in someone who was so fallible. Etain hoped she could manage to use the Force to do something more momentous than moving planks if the situation demanded it. She was certain that the next few days would test her beyond her limits. Jannart arrived just after it grew completely dark. Despite watching intently through the crack in the wall, lightsaber ready, Etain didn't see her approach, or even hear her until the door swung open. But she felt her, and she wondered why she hadn't felt her before.
"Ready, girl?"
Jannart asked. She was wrapped in a filthy shawl that seemed about to walk off on its own accord. It was a pretty convincing disguise.
"Why didn't you tell me?"
Etain asked.
"Tell you what?"
Jannart asked.
"I might be less than the ideal Padawan, but I can always sense another Jedi. I want to know why." "You're wrong. I'm not that at all. But we are serving the same cause."
Jannart cast around and picked up the remnants of a loaf that Etain hadn't finished. She shoved it under her shawl.
"That wasn't an explanation,"
Etain said, and followed her out the door. There were no Gadans to be seen. If this woman was strong in the Force and not a Jedi, she had to know why.
"I need to know what you are." "No, you don't." "How do I know that you're not someone who's turned to the dark side?"
Jannart stopped abruptly and spun around, suddenly faster and more upright than an old woman should have been.
"I can choose when I'm detected and when I'm not detected. And given your competence, I'm the one who's most at risk. Now, silence!"
It wasn't quite the answer Etain was expecting. She felt the same authority as she had in the presence of Fullier, except that he exhibited peaks and troughs in the Force, while Jannart projected an infinite steadiness. She was certainty. Etain envied certainty. Jannart led her into the woodland that skirted Imbrani to the east. She was keeping up a punishing pace, and Etain decided not to ask any more questions for the time being. At various points along the way, Jannart deviated. "Mind the Warrens," she said, and Etain sidestepped holes and depressions that told her colonies of Gadans had been busy beneath the ground. They finally paused half an hour later, having covered an arc that brought them north to the edge of the Braun River. As rivers went, it was more of a large stream. Jannart stood still, apparently looking at the water but not appearing to focus. Then she jerked her head around and stared west, taking a deep breath and exhaling slowly.
"Walk upstream,"
she said.
"Follow the riverbank and keep your wits about you. Your soldier is still there, and he needs those plans. A soldier? One? That's what I said. Come on, he won't be there much longer. Not a group, then? Not even a few? Correct. There are others, but they're a little way from here. Now, go. What makes you think that I have plans? If you hadn't, I wouldn't be risking myself to direct you towards your contact,
Gennard said.
I have other work to do now. When you find your soldier, I'll try to persuade Birhan to take him in for a while. He'll need somewhere to hide. Get on with it. He won't hang around.
Etain watched Gennard start away toward the town, looking back just once. The Padawan slipped out her lightsaber and tried to get a sense of what might lie west along the riverbank, and when she glanced back again, Gennard was nowhere to be seen. She was aware of the scrambling of small clawed feet around her. Whatever influence had kept the Gedans at bay while Gennard was with her was gone. She kicked out occasionally and hoped her boots were thick enough. If she went back to the farm, nothing would have changed, and she would be no nearer to delivering the information. She had no choice but to go on. The bank was overgrown in places, and she stepped into the river, knowing it would be shallow. The knowledge didn't make it any more pleasant to wade in sodden boots, but it was a reliable route, and it kept the Gedans from trying their luck with her. They were wary of Gennard. Etain wondered why the Force didn't deter them from stalking her as well. It was more confirmation, if she ever needed it, that she really wasn't much of a Jedi when it came to utilizing the Force. She had to concentrate. She had to find that single-minded sense of both purpose and acceptance that had so long eluded her. Although Etain had clearly not come close to mastering control of the Force, she could see and feel beyond the immediate world. She could feel the nocturnal creatures around her. She even felt the little silverweed eels parting to avoid her before they brushed her boots on the way downstream. Then, she became aware of something she wasn't expecting to encounter in the wilds of the Embrani woods. A child. She could feel a child nearby. There was something unusual about the child, but it was definitely a youngster, and there was a feeling of loss about it. She couldn't imagine any of the townspeople letting a child out at night with Gedans about.
Ignore it. This isn't your problem now,
she thought to herself. But it was a child. It wasn't afraid. It was anxious, but not scared, as any sensible child should have been, wandering around alone at night. Suddenly, there was something touching her forehead. She put out her hand instinctively, as if shooing away an insect, but there was nothing there. And still she felt something right between her brows. It dipped briefly to her chest, exactly on her sternum, and back up to her forehead. Then she was suddenly blinded by a light of painful intensity that shot out of the darkness and overwhelmed her. She had nothing to lose. She drew her lightsaber, preparing to die on her feet if nothing else. She didn't need to see her opponent. There was a slight "ah" sound. The light snapped off. She could still sense a child right in front of her.
"Sorry, ma'am,"
a man's voice said.
"I didn't recognize you."
And still, she detected only a child. So close that it had to be next to the man. For some reason, she couldn't sense him in the Force at all. Red ghost images of the light still blinded her. She held her lightsaber steady. When her vision cleared, she knew exactly who she was staring at. And she also knew Gennard had betrayed her. She'd probably betrayed Foliar, too. Etain could see the distinctive, full-faced Mandalorian helmet of Gez Hoken. The sinister, T-shaped slit told her all she needed to know. She raised the lightsaber. Both his hands were resting on the rifle. Perhaps the child, the unseen child, had been a lure, a distraction projected by Gennard.
Ma'am, put the weapon down, ma'am.
Hokin, this is for Master Fulia,
she hissed and swung at him. Hokin leapt back with astonishing reflexes. She didn't recognize his voice. It was younger, almost accentless. He didn't even raise his rifle. The monster was playing with her. She spun on the ball of her foot and very nearly took his arm off. Sudden rage constricted her throat. She slashed again, but found only air.
Ma'am, please, don't make me disarm you.
Try it,
she said. She beckoned him forward with one hand, lightsaber steady in the other.
You want this? Try me.
He launched himself at her, hitting her square in the chest and knocking her backward into the river. The child was still there. Where? How? And then Hokin was on top of her, holding her under the water with one hand, and she dropped the lightsaber. She fought and choked and thought she was going to drown, and she had no idea why she couldn't fight off an ordinary man with both her fists. She should have been able to muster more physical strength than this human. He hauled her up out of the water, one-handed, and dumped her on the riverbank, flat on her back, holding both her arms down.
Ma'am, steady now.
But she wasn't finished yet. With an animal grunt, she drove her knee up hard between his thighs, as hard as she could, and when she was frightened and desperate and angry, that was very hard indeed. She hadn't known it until now. Etain gasped as her knee went crack. It hurt, but it didn't seem to hurt him.
Ma'am, please, with respect, shut up. You're going to get us both killed.
The sinister mask loomed over her.
I'm not Hokin. I'm not him. If you just calm down, I'll show you.
He loosened his grip slightly, and she almost struggled free. Now his tone was bewildered.
Ma'am, stop this, please. I'm going to let go, and you're going to listen to me explain who I am.
Her breath was coming in gasps, and she coughed water. The ever-present child so disoriented her that she stopped trying to dislodge him and let him struggle to his feet. Etain could see him, clearly now. She could see well in the darkness, better than a normal human. She was staring at a huge, droid-like creature, clad in pale gray armor plates, with no face and no markings. It had a blaster rifle. He, held out a hand as if to pull her to her feet. Well, it wasn't Gez Hokin. That was all she could tell. She took his armored hand and got to her feet.
What in creation's name are you?
She managed to ask.
Ma'am, my apologies. I didn't recognize you at first. This is entirely my fault for failing to identify myself correctly.
He touched black-gloved fingers briefly to his temple, and she noticed the knuckle plate on the back of the gauntlets.
Commando of the Grand Army, CC 1136, ma'am. I await your orders, General.
General?
She thought to herself. Voices coming from things that appeared to have no lips reminded her too much of droids. He tilted his head slightly.
My apologies. I didn't see the braid, Commander.
And what's the Grand Army?
The Republic's army, ma'am. Sorry, I should have realized that you've been out of contact with Coruscant for a while now. And
since when did we acquire a Grand Army?
About 10 years ago.
He gestured to the bushes along the bank.
Shall we discuss this somewhere less public? You're presenting something of a target to anyone with a night scope. I think even the local militia can manage one of those between them.
I dropped my lightsaber in the river.
Let me get it, ma'am,
he said. He stepped into the shallow water, and the light on his helmet flicked on. He bent down and fumbled in the illuminated water, then stood up with the hilt in his hand.
Please don't use this on me again, will you?
Etain raked her soaking hair back from her face with chilled fingers. She took the lightsaber carefully.
I don't think I'd have much luck anyway. Look, why are you calling me Commander?
Ma'am, Jedi are all officers now. You're a Jedi, aren't you?
Hard to believe, isn't it?
No offense, Mum.
I'd ask the same question if I were you. Commander,
she thought to herself.
I'm Padawan Etain Temukin. Master Cast Fulia is dead. It seems you're the soldier I have to help.
She looked up at him.
What's your name?
Ma'am, Commando CC.
Your name. Your real name.
He hesitated.
Darman,
he said, sounding as if he were embarrassed by it.
We need to get you out of here. They're looking for me.
They won't have much trouble finding you in that outfit,
she said sarcastically.
The dirt's rinsed off.
He stood silent for a moment.
Do you have orders for me, Mum? I have to make RV Point Gamma and find the rest of my squad.
He was talking army gibberish.
When do you have to do that? Now?
He paused.
Within 12 standard hours.
Then we've got time. I have plans to show you. Come back with me and let's work out what we have to do next.
She took the lightsaber from him and gestured with both arms.
I'll help you carry what I can.
It's heavy, Mum.
I'm a Jedi. I might not be a very competent Jedi, but I am physically strong, even if you did take me down.
A bit of training will fix that, Mum,
he said, and he eased off that terrible Mandalorian helmet with a faint pop of its seal. You're a commander. He was a young man, probably in his early 20s, with close cropped black hair and dark eyes. And despite the hard planes of his face, he had a trusting and innocent expression that was so full of confidence that it surprised her. He wasn't just confident in himself, he exuded confidence in her. You're probably just a bit rusty, Mum. We'll get you back on form in no time.
Are you on form, Darman?
He had overpowered her. It wasn't supposed to be like that.
How good are you?
I'm a commando, Mum. Bred to be the best. Bred to serve you. He wasn't joking.
How old are you, Darman?
He didn't even blink. She could see the hard muscle in his neck. There wasn't even a hint of fat on his face. He looked extremely fit, indeed, upright. A model soldier. I'm 10 years old, Mum, Darman said.